عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning the different steps which we take when we come across narrations which seemingly contradict with each other. So the first step he mentioned is that if they are on the same status, meaning they are both maqbool narrations, then we will try to combine the two narrations. But if we cannot combine the two narrations, he mentions the second step. So he says, وَإِن لَمْ يُمْكِنِ الْجَمْعُ فَلَا يَخْلُو إِمَّا يُعْرَفَ التَّأْرِيخُ أَوْ لَا فإن عرف وثبت المتأخر به أو بأصرح منه فهو الناسخ والآخر المنسوخ. والنسخ رفع تعلق حكم شرعي بدليل شرعي متأخر عنه، والناسخ ما دل على الرفع المذكور، وتسميته ناسخا مجاز لأن الناسخ في الحقيقة هو الله تعالى. So he's saying that if we do not know, if we cannot combine the two narrations, then the next step is to see if we know the dates of the two narrations. So here when he says dates, obviously does not mean the exact date, like the date and the month. Rather it means that we know which narration was mentioned first and which narration came second. So he says that فَإِنْ عُرِفَ وَثَبَتَ الْمُتَأَخِّرُ, that we research and we try to identify which was later. Now he only mentions that we need to establish which was later. He doesn't mention that we need to confirm the one which was earlier, because the later one إِنَّهُ مَحَطُّ الْمَقْصُودِ is the objective. لأنه إذا علم المتأخر فلا يحتاج حينئذ إلى تاريخ المتقدم. If we know that one of the two narrations was the later one, then we don't need, or automatically we will come to know that the other narration is the earlier one. So now there are two ways that we can know it. This is what he says. He says, وَثَبَتَ الْمُتَأَخِّرُ بِهِ أَوْ بِأَصْرَحَ مِنْهُ. So there are two ways that we can know which narration is later. The first is because of the date, that we ourselves know that this year happened at the particular war which took place in this year of Hijri. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said it when they were coming back from the war, and this year took place maybe in Hajjatul Wada. So it's in that way we can know the date. That's the one way. أو بأصرح منه, or in a more clearer way we can know. And what is the more clearer way? When Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself mentions that this narration which I am saying, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gives indication that in that statement of his that this year is a later statement. So he say, for example, he says, Kuntu amurukum, I used to command you to do this. So obviously used to means in the past. Or I used to kuntu nahaytukum, as you will see an example which Ibn Hajar is going to mention later. Kuntu nahaytukum, I used to prohibit you. So when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is mentioning it, or maybe when a Sahabi is mentioning it. So Ibn Hajar mentions that is more clear, that now we know that this particular narration is later and the other narration is the earlier one. So he says, فَهُوَ النَّاسِخ وَالْآخَرُ مَنْسُوخ. So the one is called nasikh and the other is called mansukh. He moves on to define the term, but he only gives the technical definition of nasikh. He does not give the literal meaning. And knowing the literal meaning is important so that you can see the link between the two definitions, and it gives an idea of exactly what was intended from the technical meaning. So from a linguistic point, we see that the word naskh has a few meanings. In fact, amongst lexicographers, there is also a difference on what is the asal meaning. But nevertheless, we won't go into so much detail with regards to it. Al-Imam Munawi rahmallah explains and chose one word, and he said that وَالنَّسْخُ لُغَةً al-izala. It means to remove. So izala means to absolutely remove and to erase something. So this is the meaning which Al-Imam Munawi rahmallah mentions in Al-Yawaqit wa Durar. In Lisanul Arab, there are a few definitions which are given. The first definition is taking into consideration the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that إِنَّا كُنَّا نَسْتَنْسِخُ مَا كُنْتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. So based on that, the meaning nasakh is to copy something from one book into another book. So the meaning which is given then in Lisan al-Arab, nastansikhu ma taktubu al-hafaza, that the malaika are writing, so we then copied what the malaika wrote. So this here is the one meaning, and the first meaning which is given. Naskhu shay means to copy something from one book into another book. The second meaning is ibtalu shay wa iqamatu akhar maqamahu, to negate one thing and then to put something else in place of it. So for example, if you're running a company, and if you fire one manager and now put in another manager, then that is called nasakh. So you can use the word nasakh. So it's we're substituting one thing for another. The third meaning is, he gives the same meaning which Allama Munawi rahmallah has given of izala, and that is to remove something. And it is in that light that it is said, al-ashya tatanasakh, meaning tatadawal fayakunu ba'duha makanu ba'din. And then they give the example that the Arabs would say that nasakhat ash-shamsu az-zillah, that the sun came and removed the shadow, because you know a shadow is a blockage of light. So when the sun comes, the sun with all its light, it removes that shadow. So that's the third meaning which is given. And then the fourth meaning which is given is tahwil, and that means to change one thing into another. So these meanings come in detail in Lisan al-Arab, and they also mention concisely in as-Sahah. In as-Sahah, they start with this last meaning which we just mentioned. It comes at nasakhat ash-shamsu az-zil wantasakh, that azalathu, it meaning that it removed. So you can see like how Allama Munawi rahmallah mentioned that having this meaning of izala, and then the other meanings come. So from all of these meanings, we see that the following played a role in forming the technical meaning. The following words, that to remove, to change, to cancel, and to transfer. These are four words which plays a role. But the important thing to note is that the technical meaning is derived partially from each of these words. It is not one word itself that independently impacted the technical meaning. Each word here contributed towards forming the technical meaning. So Allama Jassas al-Razi rahmallah, he explains this here in Al-Fusul. He says that under the chapter of Al-Kalam fi al-Nasikh wal-Mansukh, and he starts off with the chapter of Mahiyat al-Nasikh. He says, اختلف العلماء في معنى النسخ في موضوع اللغة. And then he says, فقال قائلون هو النقل. Some says that it means to transfer. And others say that it means ibtal, others say that it means izala. So he says, وَهَذِهِ الْأَلْفَاظ مُتَقَارِبَةُ الْمَعَانِي, that these all have similar meanings. وَأَيُّهَا كَانَ الْمَعْنَى فِي اللُّغَةِ فَإِنَّهُ متى استعمل في نسخ الأحكام فهو مستعمل فيها على وجه المجاز دون الحقيقة. And thereafter he goes into detail explaining how we cannot just take one of these meanings and say that it contributed towards forming the technical meaning. Rather, each word from these played a partial role, and in that way we got the technical meaning. So to see how each of these words affected the technical meaning, we go to the text here where Ibn Hajar rahmallah defines nasakh, and he says that وَالنَّسْخُ رَفْعُ تَعَلُّقِ حُكْمٍ شَرْعِيٍّ بِدَلِيلٍ شَرْعِيٍّ مُتَأَخِّرٍ عَنْهُمْ. That what is nasakh? It's alleviating and attached ruling of Sharia with a later Shari'i proof. This is how Ibn Hajar rahmallah defines the term. So he uses the word raf'u, meaning to elevate, to raise a ruling, and that ruling is attached with the action, with a particular action, bidalilin shar'iyyin, with another proof which is also established from Sharia. So it means to replace a former ruling of Sharia with a valid ruling which comes later. Now this here is a comprehensive, and it is an encompassing definition. In each word here which Ibn Hajar rahmallah has used, it has been precisely selected. That Ibn Hajar rahmallah chose each word, and he used each word here intentionally. So we need to focus on each word of this definition. The first word which he brings is raf'u. He did not say ibtal, or he did not say tabdeel. Rather, he purposefully used the word raf'u, to raise, to elevate. That's how we translated it. Now, what's the reason why he used the word raf'u? When we explain that from a lughwi point of view, the word tahwil does come, tabdil does come. When quoting the linguistic meaning, we said that it means to change. So why didn't he say that it means to change one law of Sharia? Why is he using the word raf'u? So this is based on the definition of latter-day scholars. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmallah mentions in I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in that قلت مراده ومراد عامة السلف بالناسخ والمنسوخ رفع الحكم. And thereafter he says that when you talk of رفع الحكم, then بجملته تارة وهو اصطلاح المتأخرين. That it means to remove or to raise the ruling totally. And this here is according to mutaakhirun. So from mutaakhirun, you give from amongst the Shafi'i Usuliyun, you have Abu Bakr Sayrafi, Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, Imam Ghazali, Alama Amidi, and likewise also Ibn al-Hajib rahimahumullah. So this means that according to this definition, that all those narrations also come, all those narrations would come under the ambit of a nas, in which the ruling is totally and absolutely cancelled. So basically, when you're talking of nasakh, using the word rafa, then it means that nasakh refers to a total change in the ruling. So you it means converting something from halal to haram, or something from mubah, from permissible to impermissible. So an absolute change in the ruling. That is the meaning of nasakh when you're using the word raf'u. However, earlier scholars, they use the word nasakh in a much broader way, and therefore they use the word tabdil. So they then said, tabdilu ta'alluqi hukmin shar'iyyin. When using the word tabdil, it means to change. So it incorporates the smallest of changes, whether it is simply specifying something which was mentioned earlier. So maybe something was mentioned in a broad way in the beginning. Thereafter, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam specified it. They would use the word nasakh for that. So when you refer to books, you will find them using the term nasakh. If something was left mutlaq and now you are making taqyeed of it, then that too is considered as nasakh. This is when they use the word tabdil. But when those scholars are using the word raf', according to them, this here is not nasakh. You are not changing. Because you are just changing, you are not elevating, you are not removing the ruling. You are just changing the ruling, so therefore it does not fall under the definition of nasakh. So you can see the difference between a nasakh according to latter-day scholars and earlier scholars. Earlier scholars, according to them, nasakh was a change in the ruling, whether it is a small change or whether it is a huge change. According to latter-day scholars, nasakh is when there is an absolute and a total change, then you can use the word nasakh. When changing something from the entire ruling of something, then you use the word nasakh. So that's the first word which he used, rafa'. The second word he brings is the word ta'alluq. Now scholars before him, they simply said, raf'u hukmin shar'iyyin. They did not use the word ta'alluq. But Ibn Hajar rahmallah again purposefully added the word ta'alluq. Kamal bin Abi Sharif explains this here in his footnotes. صرح بالتعلق لألا يرد عليه ما أورده على من حذفه. That those before him who did not use the term or did not add this word ta'alluq, then objections were raised upon them. So the objections, he says, the hukam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qadim. It has been there since ever, because you know the Quran is qadim. So if there is anything which is mentioned in the Quran, then the ruling of it is also qadim. Likewise, whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to inform Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all this here is qadim. It has been there since ever. And if something is qadim, then it cannot have an end. So وَمَا ثَبَتَ قِدَمُهُ إِسْتَحَالَ عَدَمُهُ. If something did not have a beginning, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been there since ever. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there until eternity, forever. In the same way, the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when looking at the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, since the law was there since ever, the law has to also remain forever. So we're saying that you cannot totally remove the ruling of that particular law because it's going to be there forever. But we're saying that in order to remove that objection, we're saying that connecting that law with the mutakallifin, those who are obliged to follow that law, that is the Muslims who are baligh and aqil, etc. So for them, they no more have to practice upon that action. So this here you can see how precisely it is, so that it does not have that objection that by now you are cancelling a law which has been there forever and has to remain forever. So the ruling itself has no beginning, and because of that, it will always remain there. Even Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentions it. وإنما قال تعلق حكم لأن نفس الحكم قديم لا يرتفع لأنه خطاب الله تعالى المتعلق بأفعال المكلفين. So that's why before that he said قطع تعلقه بالمكلفين, that when you're talking of nasakh, it is cutting out or it's removing the attachment of that law with those who are obliged to follow that law. So that's the second word which he used. Then the third word which he used is hukmin shar'iyyin mawsuf sifa. So using this here, Al-Imam Munawi rahmallah says everything, the asal of everything is that it is permissible. So by bringing this here, a hukmin shar'iyyin, is showing that this here is actually referring, it's excluding those things which are generally permissible because of the normal ruling. So وَبِالْحُكْمِ عَنْ رَفْعِ الْعِبَاحَةِ الْأَصْلِيَّةِ فَإِنَّهُ لَا يُسَمَّى نَسْخًا. If people were always practicing on something, thereafter Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam came and prohibited them. So then you cannot use the word naskh and say that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is making naskh of the permissibility, because that earlier permissibility was just based on the natural ruling. It was not because of a prior commandment. So therefore he brings the word hukmin shar'iyyin, and thereafter he says bidalilin shar'iyyin. Why? Because at times there are people who will not practice upon certain laws, but it does not fall under the siyah. So when we translated bidalilin shar'iyyin, we translated it as valid because the thing which is intended here is ar-raf'u bil maut wal junun, that if a person becomes insane. So for example, if a person is insane, now the obligation of salah falls away. Obviously the whole discussion in fiqh, depending on how long he was in that state, etc. And nevertheless, the obligation falls away. So the obligation is falling away, but this here is not a valid reason. You cannot use the word naskh now. It might be an excuse, but it's not, and that is why we translated shar'iyyan as valid. So he says it has to be changed by another dalil. And also using the word dalil, it shows that it has to be something which is established also from Quran, and it has to match. So if it's from Quran, then it has to either be also from Quran or from a mutawatir hadith. If it is from hadith, then only, then the naskh can also be from a dalil which is established from hadith. So if in this way you can see that each word here was important. Mutaakhir, obviously that's the words which he started with, is that it's you know that this here came afterwards. So this here is the concise but comprehensive definition which he gave. You can see that it's fully jami' and fully mani'. After explaining the word naskh, he now explains the word nasikh. So now you might wonder that it's so obvious. If if you have the word naskh, the masdar, then nasikh is the ism fa'il, so automatically you ought to know the meaning. Likewise, mansukh is the ism maf'ul. So why is he now specifically mentioning it? But there is an important thing which he wanted to point out, and therefore he explained the word nasikh. He says, وَالنَّاسِخ مَا دَلَّ عَلَى الرَّفْعِ الْمَذْكُورِ. That nasikh is that which denotes upon the annulment, upon the cancellation of that law. So he clarifies that وَتَسْمِيَتُهُ نَاسِخًا مَجَازٌ لأن الناسخ في الحقيقة هو الله تعالى. That when we are referring to this verse or this particular narration, or even if we refer to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the nasikh, then saying that they are the abrogator, or saying that it's the verse is the abrogator, the verse is the nasikh, it is metaphorical, because it is Allah who is the actual one who is abrogating. So the force behind the abrogation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in verse 106 of Surah Baqarah, مَا نَنْسَخْ مِنْ آيَةٍ أَوْ نُنْسِهَا نَأْتِ بِخَيْرٍ مِنْهَا أَوْ مِثْلِهَا. So you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that we, when we abrogate the law, so Allah ta'ala is actually the one who is abrogating, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conveyed it via the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فإطلاقه على الرفع المراد به الدال عليه عام من أن يكون آية أو حديث. فالناسخ هو الله سبحانه وتعالى وإن كان يجري النسخ على لسان نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is abrogating it, but to manifest or to inform us of that abrogation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala done it on the tongue of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the reason why he gave the definition of nasikh, and it was a valid reason, and therefore he also did not give the definition of mansukh, because there was no reason to give the definition. He had a reason to define the ism fa'il, and there's no reason to define the ism maf'ul. So ulama Qurani rahmallah says, وَإِنَّمَا تَعَرَّضَ لِبَيَانِ النَّاسِخِ دُونَ الْمَنْسُخِ لِأَنَّ فِي مَفْهُومِهِ إِيهَامًا مِنْ حَيْثُ إِنَّهُ لَمْ يَرِدْ مَعْنَاهُ الْحَقِيقِي بَلِ الْمُرَادُ هُوَ الْمَعْنَى الْمَجَازِي وَالْمَنْسُخ لَيْسَ فِيهِ إِيهَام. In his footnotes, he mentions that since in mansukh you don't have this doubt, therefore there is no need for him to now specifically. Otherwise, the objection is, why is he explaining the ism fa'il and not the ism maf'ul? Now, once the definition has been explained and you understand what naskh, we need to understand the importance of the section. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah says, وَهُوَ فَنٌّ مُهِمٌّ صَعْبٌ يَفْتَقِرُ إِلَيْهِ. It is an important section, because obviously it has a direct impact on your rulings. You know how many different rulings, whether this is still permissible or whether it is no more permissible. But it is also at the same time really difficult, and يفتقر إليه, people need to understand it. وَعِلْمُهُ فَرْضُ كِفَايَةٍ. He's saying that to know what's nasikh and what's mansukh is farz kifaya. You have to have people in every era who knows what is nasikh and what is mansukh, because then you will have people saying that no, this here is still permissible, not realizing that it's actually abrogated and now it's no more permissible. Then he says, أَعْيَ الْفُقَهَا وَأَعْجَزَ الْعُلَمَاء. This is a section which has really tired the fuqaha and أَعْجَزَ الْعُلَمَاء. It has also rendered the scholars, it caused them to lose hope. That's a better way of translating the word أَعْجَزَ. So, and this whole sentence is actually getting it from Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, because Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, he mentions these words here in his muqaddamah. In page 276, he says that النوع الرابع والثلاثون معرفة ناسخ الحديث ومنسوخه. So you know we are on lesson 20 on Mudraj. 14 lessons later we'll do this here. Then he says هذا فن مهم مستصعب, and he says روينا عن الزهري رضي الله عنه أنه قال. So you can see the way Mullah al-Qari rahmallah mentioned it is like as if it is his own words, but it's actually a retweet from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah, that أعيا الفقهاء وأعجزهم أن يعرفوا ناسخ حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. That it actually really made it difficult for fuqaha to realize which narration is abrogating min mansukhihi and which one is the one which is abrogated. And thereafter he says وَكَانَ لِلشَّافِعِي رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ فِيهِ يَدٌ طُولَةٌ وَسَابِقَةٌ أُولَى. And Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah was an expert in this field. Also, it's very important to understand the wisdom in why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogated, because this is a very commonly raised objection amongst non-Muslims, that did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not know from the very beginning what will be best? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to change the ruling? Like if a president comes and changes the constitution all the time, so why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have to make so much changes? So there are various different, we can just suffice by mentioning three. The first is to allow the earlier people to generally or gradually change their ways and their habits. So if they were addicted to alcohol, Now for them to leave alcohol in one go will be difficult. Likewise, if they had numerous spouses, now to restrict them to only 4. So that is why you have mut'ah, which was first permissible and then became mansukh. So like that, to gradually, because to change their ways gradually. That's the first wisdom. The second is that at the time of legislation, when the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were coming down for the first time in the form of the Quran, there were numerous difficulties and challenges compared to the eras which came after. So taking that into consideration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made, that al-mashaqqa tajlabu taysir, that the more difficulty there is, it attracts more ease. So at that time, there was more difficulty. Going to war at that time is not the same as going to war now. Although now you can go with no weapons and you'll be fighting people with atom bombs, etc. But going at that time, because losing a war, in the Battle of Badr, the dua of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, etc. That if this group have to lose, who will be there to take on? So therefore, things were permissible when they went on war, for example. Compared to in today's times, if people have to go to war, then those same laws will not apply. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that concession at the time of legislation. And then the third is to test his servants, that to see that the servant is not following his nafs. When that very same action is permissible, the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will practice upon it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change the ruling on that very same action, and immediately the person will abstain from it. So to test his servants and to see how much they would follow him, this is the third wisdom. And there are numerous other wisdoms, like we say, we just mentioned 3 wisdoms here. He then moves on now to explain various ways in which we can discover how one narration abrogates the other. And that is why I quoted from Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, quoted from Imam Zuhri rahimahullah, that to show you that the way Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning it here seems so easy, but it made it a'yal fuqaha. It made the fuqaha. It's not something which is as easy as it might seem. And also another point to remember here, before even going through the text of his, is that this entire section, you can see Imam Zuhri is saying ayal fuqaha. So it deals with the fuqaha. It is the duty of the fuqaha. They will tell us which is what's nasikh and what's mansukh. It does not relate to ulumul hadith. And hence, you will see the way Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions the methods here. It will be, he mentions it in a very broad way. He doesn't pay attention to specific detail, to essential restrictions and specifications which the fuqaha place. Because the fuqaha, they were very specific. And this year, he's just mentioning it, so to say, in passing, but it has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with ilmul hadith. So he explains the first method by saying, أصرحها ما ورد في النص كحديث بريدة في صحيح مسلم كنت نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور فزوروها فإنها تذكر الآخرة. So he's saying that the first way to understand that one text abrogates the other is that from the nas itself, so from the Quran or from hadith itself, you understand that this is coming now later on and it's abrogating a earlier ruling. An example which he gives, he says, he actually indicates towards the narration of Buraida which comes in Sahih Muslim. And when he mentions this here, he's attributing it to Sahih Muslim, but then he's including the words, فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُ الْآخِرَةِ. So, if you have to go to Sahih Muslim, you will find that Imam Muslim rahmallah actually narrated this with different wording, and also he didn't even add on these words here, فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُ الْآخِرَةِ. It does not even come in a narration of Sahih Muslim. In Sahih Muslim, the narration comes as follows, that Abdullah bin Buraida narrates from his father, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نهيتكم عن زيارة القبور فزوروها. You can see just al there. It doesn't say فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُ الْآخِرَةَ. That comes in a narration of Sahih ibn Hibban and Sunan al-Kubra and many other kitabs, but not in Sahih Muslim. Thereafter, there are other prohibitions also which Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then all these here are further examples. وَنَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْ لُحُومِ الْأَضَاحِ فَوْقَ ثَلَاثٍ. That I prohibited you from keeping the meat which you get from udhiyah, from qurbani, for more than 3 days. فَأَمْسِكُوا مَا بَدَى لَكُمْ. But now you can keep it for as long as you want. In other narrations, وَاتَّخِرُوا, you can store it. وَنَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْ نَبِيذٍ إِلَّا فِي سِقَاءٍ فَاشْرَبُوا فِي الْأَسْقِيَةِ كُلِّهَا وَلَا تَشْرَبُوا مُسْكِرًا. And I prohibited you from a particular utensil because of the possibility of fermenting, etc. But now we give you permission to drink from any kind of utensil you want to, as long as you are sure that it will not intoxicate you. So these are, you can see there were earlier prohibitions, and from the very text, from the very hadith itself, we know that this narration is the one that is abrogating those others. So inshallah we will continue with the remaining in the next lesson, inshallah. Until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.